Thank you, and thank you to the organizers for the invite. It's really an honor to be here, and I was going to make some sort of age-related crack on the younger or older side, but I work on the House side. I'm basically an elder statesman over there. I lost all concept of, where I stand, so I'm just going to skip that. Just to reiterate, I'm speaking here on my own behalf. I'm not representing the committee or my boss or any other congressman. In fact, I'm not even here. I'll deny I know any of you, and yeah, it's not going to be that interesting anyway. So, I guess my perspective here is quite a bit different from the rest of the panel. We have actual scientists doing real science and looking at the impacts of the changes in the Arctic and how they're going to affect the rest of the country, internationally, other coastal areas. I'm dealing with a much more sort of personal level. It's focused, how does the Arctic affect the people in the lower 48? Because that's really what politics is all about, is how do these issues make people feel? And one thing you can say is the Arctic certainly makes people feel very strongly. You're at an event and people are celebrating the fact that ANWR was just recommended for wilderness. It wasn't even made wilderness, it was just recommended for wilderness. And people are crying because of the emotions this brings out, how exciting they are that they've even gotten to this step. You notice that this is certainly something that a lot of people care about, even if that's not somewhere they live or even somewhere that they've been to personally. Now, if you just look in the last month, it has been an absolute explosion of issues in the Arctic that Congress cares a lot about. I just mentioned ANWR, obviously, that's a huge issue. I was not here, unfortunately, earlier to hear Senator Murkowski speak. She has some very strong opinions on that. That's, certainly relevant. No, I don't do that. Then there's the NPRA, National Petroleum Reserve, and the approval of the drilling plan by ConocoPhillips in Greater Moose's Tooth 1 there. There was the reaffirmation of lease sale 193 offshore in the Chukchi, basically saying that, for the second time, that those leases should be allowed to stand and there should be a record of decision from DOI sometime in the next month or so on that. There's the continuing question whether Shell is going to be drilling in the Chukchi on some of those leases later this summer. I should say, before I returned to the committee about a year and a half ago, I worked at the Department of the Interior for 2 years. I was at the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement as a senior advisor there during the time that Shell was getting approval and actually conducting operations there, and I was part of the team that did that 60-day review of their operations afterwards. So I have a bit of experience on that, and then I went to the Bureau of Land Management, and was also involved in a lot of their Arctic activities, and was interfacing with the Arctic Council and the interagency group on Arctic permitting. So even though right now, I'm working for the House, I do have this background in those issues. The 5-year program that was recently announced that proposes new lease sales between 2017 and 2022 in the Beaufort and Chukchi seas, and the fact that some areas are being not offered for lease, so that created a little bit of controversy. The new regulations that were just issued in the Arctic, well, proposed regulations for how offshore drilling should occur in the Beaufort and the Chukchi. Should Shell or other companies continue doing that? And that is really just the last month. And that was a lot of issues that are getting a lot of people very excited. It's actually kind of hard to remember all of them. In fact, going through this, I almost forgot that there was a withdrawal in Bristol Bay announced in December, which by itself is a fairly big deal, but it's sort of gotten lost a bit in recent years. That's not, obviously it's not in the Arctic Ocean, but still in the Arctic region. And that sort of, has gotten buried by a lot of these other issues. Now, one issue I haven't mentioned that is not as big of a deal on the Hill, but I know is a very big deal for a lot of people in this room and a lot of people in the executive branch and really, throughout the world, is the Arctic Council and the upcoming U.S. chairmanship of the Arctic Council. I think the issue there is it's just not very well understood on the Hill. When I came back, I actually was trying to get some offices interested in making this a big priority. We're taking over the chairmanship. This is a great opportunity to push certain priorities. You have different people sending letters to the State Department asking for certain issues to be prioritized, whether it's more development or more conservation. It was very hard to engage congressional staff on that issue because they simply did not understand it. And that's a very common theme, I think, with a lot of the science and really meaningful issues that are happening in the Arctic is they're kind of confusing. There are a lot of different commissions and councils, and well, the Art Council alone has all of their different work groups. Then explaining what a work group is versus a task force gets a little difficult. And there are a number of different research initiatives and so forth. I think if there's one message I would leave for people here, it's if we can get your help in explaining this clearly to congressional staff, that would be extremely helpful. There are only 3 members of Congress that have a direct local interest in Alaska. Everyone else, it's more of a national issue that they don't have constituents that are contacting them with for that local impetus that drives most members of Congress viscerally. So it can be kind of tough to get them motivated for, well, you should be following the science here, and here's the, this new interagency group and how that differs from the old interagency group and how they interact and how everything else interacts. I mean, if you can boil it down to a 5-minute discussion of what all these initiatives are, what they're doing, why they're important, it's a lot in 5 minutes, and then why their boss should care, I think that'll get a lot more staff and consequently their members focused on these issues, and then more understanding when they come up in appropriations bills or authorization language, and there's a question of should we fund a certain commission or a certain research initiative. If they know how it fits in the big picture, that's a lot easier for them to sell, as opposed to just being one more thing that they don't know where it fits in the whole jigsaw puzzle. So that's sort of the big picture ask I would put in front of everyone here. In general, the issue over Alaska, the way I see it, is it's very similar to the issue you have anywhere in the western United States, where you have some beautiful landscapes, pressure for development. You have people who live in that state versus people who don't live in that state. And then you have people who are more pro-development and people who are more conservation. So there's really nothing unique about Alaska in that regard, except that in Alaska, everything is much more extreme. The landscapes are much larger, and you could argue more majestic, although people in the lower 48 argue everything is, that's very relative. Also the resource base. I mean, you talk about Prudhoe Bay, the largest oil field in North America, and then the discussion of what the resource might be remaining to be found. That's, we're not talking small fields people are discussing. They're saying there are huge resources out there. So these are conflicts you see elsewhere in the country, but magnified. And the pristine nature of the Arctic, again, makes that a much more large-scale issue. I think as those issues I listed off early, what you see is the administration, I think, has tried very hard to balance this tension between development and conservation. They take their mandates to be balanced very seriously. In BLM with FLTMA, and in Bessie and BOEM with the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act, both of those are balancing statutes. They tell you to conserve and develop, and to do them both carefully and in harmony with each other. And that's a tough role, and the Interior Department really does try to meet that. And that's why you see some of these, go through that list, you can say, well, some are pro-development, some are pro-conservation. There's enough to make everyone unhappy, which really on the Hill is all we're looking for, is something that we can yell about. So please don't quote that at all. That's terrible. So that's about it, and I can answer any questions.